of Richard's life, I'm going to ask Joe or Bill, I don't know which, is going to come up and give us a scripture reading from Revelation 21:4.
He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the odor of things have passed away.
Thank you, everybody, for being here today. On December 3rd, 2002, my dad and I boarded a United Airlines flight, a red-eye, bound for Guatemala City, Guatemala. My dad was coming with me to accompany me to bring my son home. He was reluctant about this whole process, but supported me in my journey to adopt my son. We arrived at 5 a.m. at Aurora Airport in Guatemala City, and were transported to our hotel, the La Princesa. I practiced this at home. I didn't cry until I got to the end.
Don't worry about it. We're okay. You're all right. Yeah.
We ate our first breakfast of huevos rancheros, Guatemalan style. They were delicious. After breakfast, we returned back to our room because we knew we had a 1 o'clock appointment to meet Joe. At 1 o'clock, there was a knock on the door. We were both nervous but excited as we approached the door to open it. Once opened, Joe's foster mother came in with a beautiful, wide-awake 3-month-old in her arms. She put Joe in my arms, and I laid him down on the bed. Both my dad and I looked at him and said, "Hola, ¿cómo estás?" Joe just looked back at us and smiled. That was it. My dad's heart grew 1,000-fold that afternoon. He was able to give love and receive love like I had never witnessed before. My dad and I had many conversations at the dinner table about how fortunate we were to have Joe as a son and to have him as a grandson. I always took that opportunity to say to my dad that Joe was a gift from God. He opened up doors and windows during the process of adoption through faith and prayer and believing. This was repeated many times. As I prayed, my dad's heart would soften, and he would let the Holy Spirit begin to whisper to him, which it did. This is only one story about a chapter in my dad's life, and I chose it today because of the meaning and the impact it's had on our family for the last 16 years. This is a story of God's love and His grace. I know that His mercy is never ending, and that His love knows no limits.
Hello, my name is Adrian Garcia, and I'm the youth pastor here at Life on the Hill Church. and I was asked by Beverly and Joe to read out loud a letter that Joe wrote just celebrating the life and the impact of his grandfather on his life. My grandfather was a great man. He was kind, funny, and someone you could rely on. He was always there for me when need be, and had passed his wisdom to me within the 16 years I had spent with him. My grandfather was one of my #1 supporters and was always by my side to cheer me on. He would always come to my sports games and be happy to drive me to my practices. A sport that he was super enthusiastic about that I began to pick up was golf. He taught me at a very early age, as we would both hit balls in our backyard. One of the fondest memories I had with him was the time we both played together and he thumped me in the back of the head on accident. As much as it hurt, he was by my side to calm me down and to assess the bump on my head. Later in his age, my grandfather began to really drop some knowledge on me, including things such as managing money, family, and some life lessons. Through thick and thin, he was the one man in my life that was always there for me. He did not care when he found out that I wanted to become a veterinarian instead of following the family legacy of going into the medical field. That's how my grandfather was. He just wanted me to try my hardest and to put my heart into it. The last couple times I had gone to visit my grandfather, I had asked him if he had any words of wisdom for me. He had told me 2 things. 1, let your horizon expand when it comes to women. And 2, be the best doctor you can be. I take these to heart, as I shall honor his wisdom, as he had always believed I was capable of doing great things.
Thank you all for being here today. On my flight here, I was thinking about what to say about my dad, and the word that kept coming back to me was the word warrior. My dad was a warrior. A warrior is someone who is strong-willed and determined, who uses his hands to make a difference in the world. He's someone who's strong and courageous. And he's someone that evolves over time as a man. And that was my dad. He showed a strong will and determination in pursuing his passions. After high school, he wanted to become a doctor, and his father had discouraged him and told him to learn a trade instead. But my dad was determined to become a doctor. And on his graduation from medical school, his father had tears of joy and couldn't have been more proud of my dad. And proud to say, my son, the doctor. He pursued a passion of sailing. He learned how to sail. Then he bought a boat, and then he sailed. And my dad's enthusiasm for boating was only rivaled by my brother Bill's. And he pursued his passion of golf. He practiced in the backyard 2 or 3 times a day, every day. He became good. And he joined a golf league and played regularly and loved it. He loved playing golf, and he loved the fellowship he had with the men he was playing with. My dad showed strong will and determination in providing for our family. Not only did he work hard and long hours as a doctor, but he also read and studied about investing and became a very astute investor. And the result of his success was that we never wanted for anything. We didn't always get what we wanted. We always got what we needed. This past week, Bev and I learned the value of one of his greatest investments when he purchased burial plots at Green Hills Memorial Park, over 50 years ago at $200 each that are now selling for $17,000. My dad was a warrior because he used his hands to make a difference in the world. He used his hands to play the drums, to entertain people. When he was a teenager, he used to take the bus to clubs in downtown Los Angeles to play and to entertain people and to earn money to help support his family. And he also used to love playing in the band with his brother Max, who played the saxophone, the clarinet, and the flute. He used his hands to build things, making many improvements in our homes over the years. He learned to be handy by working with his brothers when he was young so they could pay for his medical school. He worked with his brother Roy making signs. He worked with his brother Max building. And he worked with Irving and Herb in refrigeration. And of course, he used his hands to help heal people as a doctor. My dad was a warrior because he showed strength and courage. He beat prostate cancer. He beat bladder cancer twice. He overcame a surgery on his spine. He had a really bad fall about 5 years ago and hit his head and had a brain bleed. And we thought this was the end for him. We clearly underestimated his strength. Last year, he was diagnosed with kidney cancer. Now, most 93-year-olds with that kind of diagnosis would just let it go and take its course. Not my dad. He said, "Take the kidney. I have two. I only need one." He was a doctor. He knew. And he overcame it. Shortly after he had his kidney removed, Bev had called me and said that he was taken to the hospital and he had pneumonia. Well, in my business, when a 93-year-old in declining health who just had the kidney removed is in the hospital with pneumonia, that's not a good prognosis, so I was on a plane the next day home. And when I got to the hospital to see him, he looked at me and said, "What are you doing here?" And in my mind, I was thinking, well, clearly overreacting and underestimating your strength. I saw my dad 4 weeks ago. I had come here for a few days to see him, and his health was declining, and he was only able to communicate with me for about an hour and a half on the 2 mornings that I was with him. And the last morning, it was really difficult for him. And a few days later, it was Father's Day, and I was with my boys in Florida, and so I had arranged to do a video call with him. And I prepped my boys, and I said, "Guys, I just want you to know Grandpa is not doing very well. He may not look very good, he may not be very responsive, he may not even be able to make the call." And so we called him, and much to my surprise, my dad looked great. He was alert, he had a huge smile on his face, he was so happy to hear from us and see us. And my boys thought that I was maybe exaggerating a little bit about Grandpa. And no, I was just underestimating him again. My dad was a warrior because he evolved as a man over the course of his life. He was a man of few words. And when I used to call once a week after I graduated from college and began living all over the country, I would call and talk to my mom once a week for 20 years. And sometimes he would answer the phone, and the conversation would go like this: "Hi, Dad." "Oh, hi, Bruce. You want to speak to your mom?" Good talk. The first time that my wife, Michelle, came to visit the family before we were married, I had warned her. I said, "Okay, so when we have breakfast, we Berlin men, we don't like to talk." I said, so, my dad and Bill and I, when we eat breakfast, we eat in silence and we like to read things. And my wife is very social, and I think she thought that her sociability would break that silence. She learned otherwise the next morning at breakfast. But over the last few years, my dad was much more talkative than he had ever been when I called him each week. And over the last few months, he was always very happy to hear from me. He would always thank me for calling him and telling me that he loved me. 5 weeks ago, when I knew his health was really declining, I called him. I said, Dad, I'm going to come and see you next week. And I could hear the smile in his voice, and he said, that would be very nice. And then when I got there and saw him eating breakfast, he looked at me and said, what are you doing here? When my mom's health began to decline, he went from eating the dinner that she made to making dinner so she didn't have to. He went from finishing dinner and retreating to watch TV or do some reading to clearing the table and washing all the dishes so she didn't have to. When we were kids, Dad was always busy with work or doing home improvements or reading and learning something new, and he didn't spend much time with us. But we cherished the time that we did spend with him and have very vivid memories of those times. He regretted not spending more time with us when we were children. But we have a God of second chances. And 17 years ago, God gave my dad a second chance. And he went with Bev to Guatemala to receive the third and most favorite grandson, Joe. Dad loved Joe so much. In fact, I believe that his heart actually got bigger the more time he spent with Joe. And Joe reciprocated that love to him. The legacy of my dad's warrior traits have been left with us as children. Though all of us are strong-willed and determined, no one more emulated my dad's strong will than my brother Bill. And like my dad, who used his hands to make a difference, Bill has used his strong left hand throughout his life. And last month, he used it to win a softball throw competition at his annual Sports Fest event. I emulated my dad's courageousness when I entered my second marriage 9 years ago and blended together 5 children, ages 11, 12, 13, 15, and 17. And like my dad, I evolved enormously during that period of time as a man, as a husband, and as a father. But it is Bev who most manifested my dad's warrior-like characteristics. Her strong will and determination helped her to become a pediatric nurse for over 30 years, to get a master's degree in nursing and teach nursing for the past 12 years. And all of this while overseeing Bill's care for the last 12 years and being a single mom to Joe for the last 17 years. She used her hands to care for Dad when Dad lived with her in her house for 5 years. She showed strength and courage in advocating for Bill when he needed a voice, in advocating for Dad with caregivers in the home, with nursing staff in the hospitals and at Silverado when he needed a voice. And she showed strength and courage in loving and caring for Dad and Joe and Bill during a very difficult time over the past 5 months. No words could ever express my gratitude for all you have done in taking care of our family. Though at times he was misunderstood for his actions, Dad was driven by his love of other people, for his patience by educating them and healing them, to his friends for being their confidant and making them laugh with his jokes. In fact, when I felt the earthquake on July 4th, my immediate thought was, Dad just told his first joke had happened and had them all rolling. And he loved our family by providing for us, by teaching us, and by encouraging us. What we sometimes perceived as a glass half empty perspective that he had was really his desire for us to have our glasses full. The last few months, his entire focus was on our family. Bev would tell me every time he spoke to him, he would always ask how Bill's doing and how Joe is doing. And every time I talked to him on the phone, he always asked me how Ben and Sam were doing and how Michelle was doing. After 93 years of having a sharp and fully intact mind, he was stricken with dementia a few months ago. But he accepted it courageously, and he continued to evolve. He had a sense of contentment that I had never seen in him. He stopped worrying about things. He joyfully engaged in activities at Silverado and going on outings. I remember I talked to him a couple days before Easter, and he was thrilled to tell me about the Easter cards that he was making with the group. The staff at Silverado loved him because he was so appreciative and so joyful and so engaging. Dementia is a difficult disease to live with, but Dad demonstrated what the Apostle Paul said in Romans 8:28, that God causes all things to work together for the good of those that love him and are called according to his purposes. Of course, my dad didn't completely transform during his last days. The last day I was with him, we were sitting having breakfast, and he was in and out. And I was trying to make conversation. And his head was down, his eyes were closed, and I said, "Hey, Dad, I met your roommate, Richard. He seems like a really nice guy." And my dad went from his head down, he looked up to me, and he said, "He's a schmuck." The last thing I want to say about my dad is how he evolved in his faith. He had always believed in God. He said so, and he said he believed in God because he had seen miracle happen, things that couldn't be explained that man could do in his profession as a doctor. But he did not pursue a meaningful relationship with God. As Bev and I shared our faith with him over the years, he would listen. And he eventually went from the only prayers he ever said was grace during dinner to speaking very heartfelt and personal prayers for everyone in our family. As you've heard already today, on March 15th, Bev asked Dad if he thought about giving his heart to Jesus. And he said, "I have thought about it, but I was raised in a Jewish family." And Bev said, "Well, Jesus accepts everyone." And at that moment, he accepted the greatest gift that God has to offer: his love, his forgiveness, and eternal life. On July 1st, around 5:30 in the afternoon, a Catholic priest came to see him and pray over him. And Bev said it was so powerful, she felt the presence of God in the room. Less than an hour later, Dad entered the kingdom of heaven. But today is not a day to mourn our dad's departure of this world. Rather, it is a day to celebrate. To celebrate his life, a life of love and a life that was well lived. to celebrate his entry into heaven and his reunion with our mom, and also to celebrate God's amazing grace.